In the U.S. enterprise, most professionals are taught that the best employee is the one who makes no mistakes. Be responsive, be accurate, be dependable. Keep things moving. Do not create friction. For years, that was a credible path to a strong six-figure career. But in a world of automated workflow, AI-assisted execution, and instrumented process control, making no mistakes is becoming one of the cheapest things a company can buy. The premium is not moving toward the people who keep the machine running smoothly. It is moving toward the people who handle the machine when it breaks. That is the new divide inside white-collar work. Routine execution is still necessary, but it is increasingly treated as managed cost. Exception handling is becoming scarcer because it sits closer to asymmetric exposure. Once a case falls outside the workflow, the enterprise is no longer dealing with clean throughput. It is dealing with adjudication. Someone has to interpret the facts, weigh conflicting constraints, decide whether policy applies cleanly, and absorb the consequence of being wrong. That layer is where pricing power starts to concentrate. Most professionals in the $100,000 to $150,000 range were trained for consistency, not exception density. They learned how to keep timelines intact, coordinate across teams, produce clean updates, maintain quality, and execute inside a process without drama. That still matters. But as systems become better at supporting baseline competence, the labor market attached to routine competence starts losing scarcity. The company still needs the work. It simply becomes less willing to pay a premium for the person doing it. This is the mechanism. Standard work becomes cheaper as it becomes more measurable, more legible, and easier to distribute across software, templates, shared service structures, and AI-supported workflows. Exception work becomes more valuable because it concentrates uncertainty that the system cannot fully pre-price. The moment something no longer fits the normal path, the enterprise faces a judgment problem. Is this a policy issue, a revenue issue, a legal issue, a trust issue, or a systems issue? Should the rule be enforced, bent, rewritten, escalated, or overridden? That is not throughput. That is decision architecture under ambiguity. From a CFO's perspective, the distinction is blunt. Routine work is a managed cost. Exception handling is often a capital preservation function. One mishandled edge case in a U.S. firm can create regulatory friction, contract exposure, client loss, reputational contagion, or expensive operational spillover. That is why the premium survives at the exception layer. The company may compress pay around stable execution while still protecting compensation for the people trusted to perform risk triage when irregularity enters the system. They are not paid more because they work harder. They are paid more because their judgment prevents small abnormalities from becoming large financial consequences. That is where many professionals misread their own position. They look at workload and assume that workload equals leverage. They look at trust and assume that trust automatically compounds into bargaining power. But a role can be busy, respected, and essential to continuity while still being economically compressible. If your main value is that you process clean cases, maintain workflow discipline, produce orderly output, and reduce friction across known paths, the enterprise can appreciate you while slowly repricing your contribution downward. Appreciation is not the same thing as scarcity, and scarcity is what premium compensation follows. The market is now separating two categories of white-collar value. The first is reliable utility. Reliable utility keeps the machine moving. It handles volume, maintains consistency, follows process, and protects operational smoothness. The second is consequence-bearing judgment. That layer handles the abnormal case, interprets conflicting facts, makes recommendations under uncertainty, and carries decision rights when the workflow no longer tells the company what to do. The first category remains useful. The second category is becoming harder to replace. This does not mean the exception layer always looks senior, glamorous, or executive. Often it sits quietly inside the enterprise. It may be the person who decides whether a client issue deserves policy exception. It may be the operator trusted to determine whether a discrepancy is noise, fraud, or control failure. It may be the finance lead who sees that a healthy metric is masking a dangerous distortion. It may be the manager who can tell when a delivery issue is local execution failure versus structural breakdown. In each case, the premium comes from adjudication, not from volume handling. That matters as AI expands baseline competence. Drafting, summarizing, formatting, comparing, routing, tracking, and flagging are becoming cheaper forms of labor. The firm will consume those functions, but the compensation logic attached to them can weaken once quality is system-assisted. The employee who follows the model may remain employed. The employee who decides what to do when the model produces ambiguity is more likely to retain leverage. Judgment at the edge of uncertainty preserves pricing power when standardized execution becomes easier to buy inside firms. A useful diagnostic is simple. Look at your last 3 escalations. When something unusual happened, were you the person who summarized the problem for someone else to decide? Or were you the person asked, "What do you recommend we do?" Did you package ambiguity, or did you adjudicate it? Did you route exposure upward, or were you trusted to interpret the exposure and convert it into a decision? That distinction reveals more about your pricing power than your rating. It shows whether you sit near consequence or merely near process. This is why so many careers now feel confusing. Professionals are praised, overloaded, and trusted to execute, yet compensation momentum feels thinner than effort would suggest. The explanation is often structural. They are carrying throughput without holding decision rights. They are helping the machine operate, but not determining what happens when the machine encounters irregularity. As normal path work gets cheaper, the labor premium shifts toward the people who absorb exception risk, not the people who merely keep standard operations clean. The company values them. It just stops paying as if that value is scarce. The practical implication is not to chase chaos or manufacture visibility. It is to move closer to the boundary where policy meets ambiguity, where metrics require interpretation, where workflow meets failure, and where someone has to make a judgment with asymmetric consequences. Stop assuming volume proves value. Stop confusing trust with pricing power. In this market, the company rewards stable execution as a condition of entry. The premium is moving toward decision rights under uncertainty, especially where a wrong call can create downstream cost. The warning sign is not that your job is unimportant. It is that your contribution is praised when the system is functioning normally. Once that happens, the enterprise can continue depending on you while becoming less willing to pay as if your role is rare. The next premium in corporate America is not hiding in perfect execution. It is hiding in the exception layer, where irregularity has to be interpreted, exposure has to be contained, and judgment has to carry the cost of being wrong. That is where leverage survives as routine competence becomes easier to systematize.